In 2018, this is where it gets quite big. So in 2018, there is a bill which comes to pretty much close to £20,000. Hello everybody, welcome to number 27, I'm Jack. Now I think that in our time, most of us who are passionate about cars have wanted to own a Ferrari. And Enzo Ferrari himself only considered the real Ferraris to be the V12s. And indeed, you are an illustrious company on that side of things, because that includes things like the GTO, the Daytona, the Testarossa, the Enzo, loads of pretty incredible cars. But the question is, could you actually buy a V12 and could you afford to run one? Now, it is going to be expensive, but just how expensive is it going to be? Is it overblown or is it true? Now, my friend Fergus bought this 456, which at the time, I bought it about a year and a half ago. These have always been quite undervalued, really. They've gone up recently. But he got it for quite a decent price, and he's been relatively lucky because in a year and a half of ownership, despite having to have changed the clutch, which is pretty much the only main expense that he had, and also an inlet manifold gasket as well, he's only had to spend, well, only I say, but he's spent basically around £3,500 for that and a few other sort of miscellaneous bits and bobs, which isn't really, in the great scheme of things, all that much. If you also take into account the fact that the car has actually appreciated in value while he's had it. However, if you were to have one of these cars for its lifetime, how much would it actually cost? Now, I'm really lucky in that my friend James, aka JM from JM on Cars, he owns both a 550, that's a V12 Ferrari, and a 430 Scuderia, so that's a V8. Now, his 550 has an extremely comprehensive service history, going back through all of the car's life. So I'm going to be able to look back and see and add up exactly how much was spent on a Ferrari V12 in its lifetime for that particular car. I think we're talking about 21 years. So we'll find out how expensive it is and what had to be done during that time. So I will also do a comparison with the 430 Scuderia and what that has cost to keep up until this point. And we are now magically going to transport ourselves into James's 550, where I'm going to go through all the costs on that car. This 550 was bought in 1999, and the prices then would have been £140,000, which in today's money is probably £240,000, pretty much with inflation adjusted. There are actually a couple of years missing from the service record, unfortunately, so it starts off at 2003. But I would imagine in the first couple of years it would have just been regular servicing, so maybe we can add a couple of £1,000 to this bill. But first of all, in 2003, a standard service, which was £1,300, so not too bad. What is more interesting is that already the car's 4 years old and they had to do a crankshaft seal at a cost of £3,043. 2004 water pump, because basically there was a water leak, so they replaced the water pump. There's tyres and stuff, so that's 700 for the leak, 700 for the tyres and so on. In 2005, and there's a normal service, sorry, 1,500, and again another leak. This time I think it was an oil leak, £969. Again, Bob Horton is the next invoice in 2006, and that was just a standard service, a relatively bargain price of £700. The next few years, so 2007, 2008, 2009, were just standard servicing, £850, £1,200, £504, so almost cheap to run for those days. Then in 2010, it had a bigger service, so 3,000. So that was a big service, plus the brakes were overhauled on that as well. Pads and discs changed. In 2011, again, the costs have gone up again, which I think is the pattern for these cars. You get 2 or 3 years with relatively not too many costs, and then after that, it sort of slams you. So 2011, a service with another water pump, and also the cam covers were done, and that was 4,448, and another £300 for parts, I think. 2012 and 2012, 2013 weren't big years. So again, there was a standard service at 700, but in 2013, there was a clutch master cylinder as well, which was done, and that cost £2,011. Now, there is a little bit of a hole here in the intervening 5 years. However, you will see from the invoices that come after, I'm pretty sure not very much was done, just standard servicing. So again, maybe we can add £3,000, £4,000 for those years. Because in 2018, this is where it gets quite big. So in 2018, there is a bill which comes to pretty much close to £20,000. There was a clutch, there was a hub that needed changing, there was a strut, there was engine mounts, various other jobs and labour, which brings it, as I said, just labour was £13,000, parts were close to £7,000. This was just before James bought the car. Then in 2019, another sort of quite minor service, £537, so the usual stuff like oil and bits and bobs. In 2020, a rear wheel was changed, which was quite reasonable in a way, £537. It doesn't sound too bad for a Ferrari wheel direct from Ferrari. And then there was a fuel pump hoses, so the car went through Ferrari's premium program where they change all the bits that are likely to fail, like fuel pumps, various hoses, clips, all that kind of stuff. That was for a total cost of about £5,000. And then after that, in 2021, there was an inertia switch. So the car started running badly and it was down to that inertia switch. That was just £169. Now, since this point, I know James is now coming up to another big bill with the 550, but I'll put a video link to that in the video description, so you can go and see what he has spent in the last year, which is, I think, going to be quite another big bill. But in the meantime, the grand total of what has been spent on this 550 since it was new and documented is £48,787. Now, I mentioned there were a few intervening years where there was a couple of invoices missed, and I would estimate maybe we can add another £6,000 to that to be on the safe side. So really, we're looking at a total of £55,000. Now, that does not cover things like the insurance, road tax and so on. So those are going to be bills on top, petrol and so on. So it definitely wasn't cheap to run. On the other hand, what's it worth now? Probably about £80,000, so it's depreciated £80,000. It is an expensive car, but unlike some of the others, maybe some of the Bentleys you could have got at the time, which would have been even more money than this Ferrari, and would have depreciated much, much worse and probably cost very similar amounts to run, it's not completely horrific. So the V12s definitely aren't cheap cars to maintain. Maybe you could go for a Ferrari V8 and that would cost less. Let's compare, because my friend James, who owns this 550, also has a 430 Scuderia. So the 430 was bought new in 99. The first bill was in 2009. The first bill was actually in 2010. So from 2010, I don't want to bore you here, to 2014, it was actually mainly standard servicing. So 1,800, 1,300, 586 actually for the TPMS sensors, so tyre pressure sensors, which is the biggest con in the world in my view. Not necessarily just Ferrari, just generally they are a big con. You have to have them for MOTs. They fail constantly. They don't really do that much. Not a fan of those. Anyway, and a battery at 108, which is very decent really. 2015 though, so that's just 6 years. When the car is 6 years old, and I think it had 20,000 or 19,000 miles at the time. It's another big bill, and this one, well, it's the first big bill, but it is a big bill, and it is £10,300. Why was it so expensive? Well, the ball joints were done, tyres were done, general service, lots of other little bits and bobs, but crucially, and this really shouldn't have happened to a car of this age and this mileage in my view, the exhaust manifold, or half the exhaust manifold, had to be changed because it was cracked. The cost of the part itself, not including VAT, was £2,500. on its own. So plus fitting, that accounts for almost, not quite, but almost half of that cost. 2016 is another sort of fairly big amount. We're not going to include this at the moment because the car was sold and taken in by Ferrari approved, and they did various jobs like the tie rods, the alloys, service, the key wasn't working, fob, etc. That was vehicle prep that was classed at, and that was £4,200. I won't include that in the first total that's coming up. 2017, you had a normal service, only £1,000, so not that bad. The tyres, plus again the TPS sensor, that massive con, 1,355. And then the current owner spent £2,400 on a Ferrari warranty. 2018, £1,700 for a service and a battery, which was an upgraded battery, which was £360, which I don't understand why a normal Ferrari V8 needs that expensive a battery. But anyway, 2019 again was just a service, 972. And in 2020, service plus brake calipers were redone, plus a charger was bought for £2,308. In 2021, and again, I won't include this in the first total, there was basically, again, sales prep when the car was sold to James that he got it. So that included things like changing the exhaust box, which had, again, a crack in it, I think. The ball joints, door strap was broken, brake rebuild, and that came to £8,674. So, total one, that is the actual money spent by owners on this car. £26,433. Now, this doesn't include any of the work that was done to the car when it went through the Ferrari network. If we include that work, so the work was done prior to sale each time it was sold, you have to add another 13,000 to that. So we are looking really at 27, at about close to £40,000 would have been spent on the 430 to keep it going. In many ways, that actually makes the V12s look like a bit of a bargain. If it's in short history, the V8 seems to have cost way more than the V12s, which is bizarre. I don't know if this is normal or not. But it really does seem that the V8s, or at least the modern V8s, are even more expensive to run than some of the older V12s. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see what James has spent on this car, I'll put a link in the video description, what he spent on this car since I've done this video. I'll put the link in the video. If you want to contact me, then Instagram is the best way, the messenger on that. Please do subscribe if you haven't, and I really look forward to seeing you for the next video. Buy a Ferrari V12. I think that's the only lesson we can learn here.